Hi, my name is Julianne, also known as Roadrunner, and in 2022 I thru-hiked the entire Appalachian Trail from Springer Mountain, Georgia to Katahdin, Maine, and today I want to tell you some tips and tricks when it comes to your tent, but as well as sleeping inside of the tent. And no, I don't have beautiful views right now. This is it, my backyard in Florida, and it's hot as you know what. But the tricks, they're going to be very helpful for you and your next hike or perhaps through hike. When setting up your tent, especially Dyneema tents, you will want to be careful not to tighten the corners as tight as possible. You do want to give it a little bit of slack, simply because Dyneema tents in particular are susceptible to the stretch and little holes will form around the corners. Now you can fix that with some Dyneema repair. However, I know we're investing a lot of money in our tent, so we want to keep it as nice of a shape as possible, as long as possible. So that would help, not compromise the corners as much. Now, in addition to doing that, Dyneema tents are susceptible to UV and sunlight, so the more exposed to sunlight, the faster the material will break down. So an extra tip would keep the tent in the Dyneema bag that most bags come with, and then also maybe even put it into your backpack so that it is not exposed to the sunlight, elements, UV light, etc. Do avoid setting tents up in grass like I did. This is literally the only place I could set up my tent, but try to avoid grass. Grass pretty much guarantees condensation in the morning. It never fails. You set up your tent in grass, you will have condensation in the morning. Now, with single wall tents, the chances of condensation are very high, but personally on my thru hike, the only time that I had any sort of condensation was when I set it up in grass. An extra tip is to set up your tent on top of a bunch of leaves, whether you're in good weather or bad weather, but especially in bad weather. When I set up my tent on top of a bunch of leaves, it kept the bottom of the tent much cleaner. It was much easier to clean them in the morning, and the leaves themselves protect the tent from, like stones and rocks and things like that. So I definitely recommend setting up your tent on top of leaves. Now, do set up your tent near trees. I know this is a joke of a tree, but you get the point. Setting up your tent near trees is a protection guaranteed, meaning it's really nice to put your tent up on top of a view, on top of a bald, on top of a ridge, but you will be exposed to wind and the elements. The weather will be much colder and it gets scary at night, if you get my drift. But setting it up near trees, you will have a shelter from wind. Now, do make sure that you don't set up your tree right under something called a widowmaker. A widowmaker is a dead limb on a perhaps dead tree that could fall on top of your tent at any time. So set it up near a tree, but maybe not under a dead tree. Let's talk about ground sheets. Now, this is not a ground sheet. I don't own a ground sheet for my Dyneema tent, but I do feel like it's important to mention ground sheets, and I am not opposed to ground sheets. I am definitely thinking about getting one. But a ground sheet under a tent should never stick out from under the tent. It should fit right under the bathtub. Why? When rain falls, rain will accumulate on the ground sheet, pool up right under the tent, and it will create a little ocean, and you are going to be guaranteed to have a wet bathtub. Now, if the ground sheet is right under, no rain will come on top of the ground sheet and pool up under. So always make sure that your ground sheet size is smaller than the size of your tent bathtub. Now, when you get in the tent, try to keep your backpack inside of the tent. I mean, it protects it from the elements. It's pretty straightforward. If your tent is too small to have the backpack inside, if you have it outside, try to tie it to something so that a fox or coyote or any sort of animal cannot grab it and drag it away. Now, at some point, you will set up your tent on a slant. And that happens, you just take your Crocs or any sort of items from your backpack and you place them on the side that would be slanted, and that way you can level out your sleeping pad a lot better. In addition, from keeping my pad from sliding, I do have a little foam pad that I put under my sleeping pad that keeps it from sliding, and also it creates extra heat on cold nights. Now, one of my favorite discoveries while I did my thru hike is wet socks. Favorite discoveries, I don't know, but it is very, very tempting just to take your socks and try to hang them somewhere inside of your tent and see if they're gonna dry, right? Unfortunately, that doesn't work. It has never worked when I tried to do it. It essentially just keeps them cold and wet, and it also creates extra condensation within the tent. One of the best tricks, even though it does feel a little uncomfortable at the beginning, is putting your wet clothes into the bottom of your toe box, and the heat that you create overnight will dry out your socks and your clothes. In addition to slants and such, sometimes your body is going to slide down to the bottom of the tent, and so when that happens, your quilt or sleeping bag might touch the tent, therefore touching condensation. So one of the things that I liked to do is put the bottom of my toe box inside of my backpack. Not only does it protect from condensation, but it also created extra heat on the extra cold nights. Now, one of the big controversies when it comes to Dyneema tent is whether to pack the tent folding it or whether to pack it all scrunched up. On my thru hike, I packed up my tent mostly folded. People say that if you do fold it, it does create creases and therefore it will break down the tent a lot more. I folded it up by, just scrunching it up a few times, and I didn't really like the way that ended up being with my tent. Now, my tent is in good shape. I hiked through the entire Appalachian Trail with it, and my goal is to make it last one more thru hike. So always, always keep your tent clean. Always, always protect it from the elements. And I do highly encourage you to keep it inside of your backpack when it is not wet.